Thank you for staying with us. Now we're going to discuss that favorite topic of ours,
Take it away.
It's towards sustainable electricity. We've been talking about electricity forever, and we're not going to stop talking about it
Until we
soon.
have it. Until we have it sustainably. We won't stop talking about it.
Very correct.
Yeah.
And that's what we're all about this morning. Power outages. They have been a major subject forever. And most recently, there have been blackouts across the country. And the Minister of Power, Sally Mammon, apologized for the power outages and revealed that the reason was because of the breakdown of the national integrated power plants supplying electricity to the national grid. We also hear that this has a thing or two to do with the supply of gas. Well, we have an expert in the studio this morning who's going to help us analyze all of this and clarify things for us. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Omonfoman.
Good morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Mr. Omonfoman is an energy expert and is the Chief Executive Officer of New Hampshire Capital Limited.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining us this morning. Are you sure you're ready for all the fireworks that's going to come to you, both from us and from people at home?
Sure. I think we just need to be logical about the power situation in the country and start to think of very sensible solutions to solving the problem.
There is no doubt that there is no logic in loss of resources that is avoidable.
Sure.
You know, the micro, small, and medium business owner whose business has gone under because of avoidable power outage cannot be logical at this point because his banker is not going to be logical. The people working with him is not going to be logical.
At the end of the month.
At the end of the month. So
yeah.
How do we explain that?
Okay, so I also am part of the businesses that suffer from these power outages.
So let's begin from
there. We're on reliable power. But however, we need to, first of all, take 2 steps back and then look at where the problem or problems lie and how we can move forward if there's even a path forward in the way and manner is structured. We all know the problems of the power sector, high technical and collection losses. But beyond those losses, I think you have issues of corporate governance across the sector. You have regulatory issues as well. And then you have what I call structural issues with the power sector. In fact, all the issues you see in terms of financial challenges, illiquidity of the market, is pretty much as a result of the underlying structural issues with the power sector market, because the power sector is a market as is, where people produce and people enjoy the service and they pay. So there's a structural challenge there which needs to be sorted in various ways. Now, first things first, let's look at the 2020 statistics just to put things in very plain perspective. We had power is produced by generation companies, either hydros or gas-based gencos. We don't have coal-fired gencos. Neither do we have solar gencos that are connected to the grid. They produce these electrons. TCN transmits the electrons, and we have the distribution company who serves the last mile customers, you and I, right? That's one flow of the market. The other flow of the market is cash. We then enjoy the service and pay. So money then goes up the value chain again. Somehow, somewhere, between the generation and your house, there is a loss, huge loss, as a result of all sorts of technical issues. And then when you're paying your money, there's also a loss as a result of all sorts of human issues, non-efficiency of collections, and people just really avoiding to pay their bills and stealing electricity. So once you put that in a market, you have a gap. So let's look at the statistics. These generators invoice, they produced electricity worth 730 billion naira, which they sold. Now, in 2020, so
okay,
reading 2020 stats, in a year, they produced 730 billion. So to produce that electricity, they had to buy gas from Shell, ITU, and all the other gas producers, and also had to pay water management fees to the federal government for the hydros. And then guess what they were paid? They were paid 320 billion. So there's a shortfall. If you were a generator,
less than half.
Yes, you have a shortfall of over 400 billion on one side of the value chain, the side that produces the electricity we all consume. Then on the distribution side, the distribution companies got whatever energy they got from from TCN and then sold to us. And they billed us a total of about 816 billion naira. Having billed us that, they were only able
to receive
542 billion, which they collected from us.
Another 300 billion.
That's the first loss. Actually, the loss started from the billing, because the billing efficiency, they did not bill for the entire energy that they got from TCN. There's a billing efficiency of 70%. That means a 30% gap from the billing. So you have a loss as well there.
Not the collection.
Not the collection, just the billing alone. So maybe 3 of us consumed electricity, they were only able to bill two of us. You got free energy or whatever.
Oh yes, I always get free energy.
And then having collected 542 billion, what did they remit back upstream? Because they pay...
because they're also owing.
They're also owing.
TCN.
Yes, TCN and the Gencos. They paid the market 220 billion, leaving a gap of about 510 billion. Oh, God. So if you are in that market, you cannot operate. You're literally stifled. That is where the problems, and like I keep saying, that's a structural issue that we must address. Right? There are also technical issues as well, but pretty much what we have today, these blackouts and the outrage, as we so say, is arising from all that.
Mr. Omonfoman, one would expect that since this these discos were privatized, that they would have put mechanisms in place so that there will not be so many gaps up and down the chain. They would have to spend money so that they will be able to collect adequate funds for the power that they supply. So who's to blame for all these gaps going up and going down?
I think there's been enough blame since privatization was concluded about 7 years ago. And you're absolutely correct. The core reason for privatization was the fact that private investors were supposed to come in and make these investments and then get us to efficiency. But we have seen that has not happened for a number of reasons, which I don't think I want to go into. But the more important thing is that we have a structural problem. And let me give you a very classic example of the structural problem that we face. On the generation side, we have excess generation. You might not believe it, but there are enough generation plants in this country to serve our needs as we speak. We're not even talking about...
Yes. You must be joking.
I'm not joking. We have enough generation plants to serve.
Have enough generation plants.
We do not have
enough generation capacity?
Yes, we do.
Do we have enough generation?
I would explain that. But let me just get through my chain of thought and I'll come back to that. We have enough generation plants and enough capacity, right, to meet our energy needs. And the reason why you have that is because there's competition at the generation level. So the federal government, besides the federal government plants, which are the NIPPs, owned by the Niger Delta Holding Company, and then 1 or 2 power plants built recently by the federal government. You've got private generators, Azura, the Olorin Shogos, the Geregus, privatized plants, the Egbins. And then you then have a monopoly, transmission, and you then create private monopolies at distribution, the last mile. This is where the challenge is, that bottleneck where you have excess generation and then guess what? You then have monopolies who are unable to fund, take the power that is generated and effectively and optimally distribute it and collect the revenues, right? So that is the first structural problem. So I think the way to start to address this is beyond what the federal government is doing, and they're doing a great work in terms of providing funding for the power sector, which again, is an anomaly, because if you say you privatized, why are you then funding the power sector?
Exactly.
The federal government, through the CBN, has funded the power sector in 5 years about 2 trillion naira in funding. 2 trillion naira. I mean, we can calculate that. But that hasn't gone anywhere. Unfortunately, we'll pay that 2 trillion naira from our tariffs. So what I think needs to start to happen is we need to infuse competition at the last mile of the value chain, which is at the distribution side. And the only way to do that is that you need to decentralize electricity regulation. That's what I call energy federalism. So for instance, you've talked about the small businesses. The small businesses are in the states. They actually drive the state economy. As a matter of fact, the federal government, if you were to use the treaty of government, the federal government really can't say they have electricity customers, maybe except the ones that are on the TCN, on the direct TCN connection, the big companies like Dangote and Co. But the bulk of the customers are within the states. So it then...
So they're served by discos?
Yes. Okay. And you've then created monopolies, private monopolies at state level, such that the states are sort of hindered from going ahead to serve electricity efficiently to their population. But that's an anomaly in itself, because if you looked at the Constitution, and I'll be very precise, there's this conversation that states cannot get into electricity. Electricity is for the federal government. Absolutely not true. The Constitution recognizes electricity as a shared obligation between the federal and the state, and that's why I put it in the concurrent list. So if you looked at Section 13 and 14, Part 2 of the Constitution, it talks about electricity. And it's very interesting that at the federal level, the Constitution actually says generation and transmission belongs to the federal government. It never mentioned distribution, except distribution amongst the Nigeria and our neighbors. But Section 14 says state House of Assemblies can make law for electricity and also for electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. It specifically mentions distribution when it talks about states, the laws, the electricity laws state houses can make.
It sounds to me, Mr. Omonfoman, that you're saying
sorry,
that
but there's a
the
caveat.
law is a problem here. Don't answer that one yet. Let's take this break. We'll be right back. Well, thanks for staying with us. Yeah, there's this interesting question that I can't answer it like, I can't ask it like you. No, seriously.
Yes, we were talking about the federal government and the states houses of assembly having to do something about, power. And I recalled that in the early 2000s or so, Lagos State was actually supplying power, which came from Enron, and they had them on barges somewhere around Lagos. So what happened to that, and why did the state government suddenly lose zeal to fight to wrest this ability to supply power to their people from the federal government?
In the light of that law that you quoted.
Okay, excellent. So along those laws, that's why the Lagos State government, early 2000, started the AES badge, which was, I think, a 270 megawatts power badge. Now, what Lagos State was looking at doing was islanding the entire Lagos State. In other words, they'll put that badge and then they would generate the power and then distribute across Lagos and sell. But remember, 2000, 2001, we had a behemoth called NEPA. And NEPA was a vertical company that controlled generation, transmission, distribution.
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
So it was almost impossible for Lagos to put that badge and then distribute the power. So
but the Constitution at that time said what you said earlier.
Yes, but what the Constitution says was that you can generate, transmit, distribute power to areas not covered by the grid. But Lagos wanted to island the whole of Lagos. So there was a conflict with the federal government or under the then leadership. Beyond that, there was also a Power Sector Reform Act in the works at then. And what the federal government had said was that act would address some of these inefficiencies. So that act ended up splitting NEPA into PHCN.
And it still didn't address the situation.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
even though the AS badge was brought in, supplied power, the federal government ended up buying the power and then selling, it does not stop. State governments, in my view, need to start to look at that section of the Constitution and start to decentralize electricity regulation. Because what decentralizing electricity regulation will do is that it will then create the environment that the federal government has already used to attract investments in the power sector at state level, where you then control the electricity generation, distribution, transmission, distribution within your state in partnership, in collaboration with the federal government. So this is not a law that should conflict with what with the existing structure.
Yeah.
It should be complementary, because you have a lot of people that are unserved. Guess what? This entire power sector we're talking about, we have less than 12 million customers. But we have a country of 200 million people. So all this talk is about...
Less than 12 million?
Please say that again.
Yes, 12 million customers.
Oh,
On the registers of
200 million?
Yes. You've got households in excess of 40 million. So we haven't even scratched the power sector. The MITO, the tariff projections project that you have 9% annual growth of electricity customers. You know, so we're growing. Just look around you see the houses springing up. So we haven't even started. You've got areas that are underserved and unserved.
So can you explain to us, please, why states are not fighting to do this, to make their people happy?
I'm not sure why, but some states have woken up. For instance, Lagos State, I know under the last dispensation before the current governor, and I think the present commissioner of energy in Lagos State is also working towards it. The Lagos State tried to pass an electricity act. That act was very encompassing, where the act would create a regulatory agency in Lagos State that would regulate electricity, and also like a board that would work with the existing structure set up by the federal government to generate, distribute, and collect for electricity. I'm not sure why that law wasn't passed, and I'm not sure what the status of the law is today. I would need to refresh to find out. But other state governments are pushing. So, for instance, Edo State, which is incidentally my state, there's a 50 megawatt power plant, the Osimo power plant, which the governor has, in conjunction with private investors, they've built. And that power plant is supposed to serve government residences. The challenge they've had is, beyond government offices, you need to also get the power to other areas in Benin. But there's one monopoly there that says, I own the network. Benin Electricity. You can't sell power under my nose to my customers. Never mind the fact that I'm not serving my customers as optimally as I can, even though I know they're doing their best, but you just can't sell power. There's a law that prevents you from selling power to Odeon or to somebody else, you know. So that's where they're stuck. Now, I think that states should go the route of creating their own state electricity regulatory commissions that will then put in place some of these regulations and laws that would do that synergy between the existing monopolies and what the states can do. In other words, distributing those powers to areas that are unserved or underserved.
Suppose this one that the Edo government is building was to serve those areas. Would there have been any palaver with the existing disco?
What areas are you referring to?
The unserved.
Okay, so again, the way power works is at the end of the day, you need to sell power. You need to pay for power at the end of the day,
Yes.
and which comes back to the initial topic. So Edo State government would have to start from where the power is most needed, which is your industrial areas.
Okay.
Because those are the people...
And they are served already?
Well, some of them are served, and I know they're creating an industrial park where they'll sell some of that power there. But existing industries, you want to push power there. You know, you really want to sell. Now, it's a very simple solution. My take would have been the existing disco would supplement whatever it gets from the grid, whatever the Edo State power plant gives to it, and then they will serve this customer. But for some reasons, they've not been able to reach an agreement. But that's how the law should work, where there's a collaboration. Again, this is not a competition, a collaboration between the state regulators and the federal regulators, in line and, I mean, collaborate with the market participants at state level, at federal level, to give us power, competition.
Given the example of Lagos, and given some of the things that happen between the federal government and state governments at various levels in various other sectors, how do you see that working?
Again, we need to create an atmosphere of collaboration. You see, the federal government cannot do it all alone.
But the federal government has all the power by law, so to speak.
I wouldn't say they have all the powers by law,
Well,
right?
if they laws, because I believe that, I want to believe that the state governors know all the laws, all the powers that they have per law. And for them to not have access to those things, is it a problem then of law or of politics?
That's an interesting question. I would counsel politics because I'll try as much as possible not to make this political.
Okay.
Let me abide with the CBN governor's directive that we shouldn't make certain things political. I would say it's a function of how we've interpreted the law, right? The existing laws. So people at federal level, they've interpreted it to mean that you cannot have state electricity regulatory commissions, which somewhere in the law, it actually makes provisions for. People at the federal have said, do you know what? Okay, you can generate 1 megawatt and below. You don't need to come to Abuja to get a license. But anything above 1 megawatt, you have to run to Abuja and tell us why you need to generate 1 megawatt and above. The other problem is, okay, if you have succeeded in demonstrating that your power plant shouldn't get above 1 megawatt, can you distribute and sell that 1 megawatt? No, you can't, because there's a federal law that says you can only distribute 100 kilowatt hour. 100 kilowatt hour is not enough to run this channel's premises. It's not enough. So you can imagine the constraint where you've succeeded in building 1 megawatt, you didn't go to Abuja, but you then have to find a way to sell your 1 megawatt to many people that require it. So, because there's a law that says you can't do more than 100. So those are the things that the state governors, particularly the Nigerian Governors Forum, should start to address. If we were to talk about federalism, energy federalism is extremely key. We see the effect of it every day.
But at this point, it's still a problem with law. Let's talk about, I mean, that's so far as you have told us. Let's talk about this NIPP that, went under. I'm wondering what you think caused that in the first place. 8 plants, all at the same time. Okay, we hear one of them was under maintenance. Let's assume that that was scheduled, okay, and it was supposed to be going on. But 7 all went under at about the same time. Is that a problem of effectiveness or efficiency or a lack of?
Let me carefully phrase my words. I would say the minister's tweet may have been misunderstood. Why do I say so? Power plants just don't break down like that. Power plants consist of several turbines. You could have one turbine going down, but to have 4 turbines or 5 turbines going down at the same time is a rarity. You would have completely mismanaged our power plants. I also know that the owners of those power plants, some of the power plants that were mentioned are actually private, or under private ownership, like Egbin. It's not under the NIPP or IBOM. IBOM is owned by the Akwa Ibom government. But the ones that were mentioned, the NIPP plants, they're managed by the Niger Delta Power Holding Company, which is a supposedly private entity, well, public entity owned by the state government and federal government. And I know they do a good job managing their plants. So that's why I say very carefully that the minister may have been misunderstood. Having said that, these power plants are gas-based, are thermal power plants. If you do not have the feedstock to produce electricity, you cannot produce electricity. And for them, their feedstock is gas. So if there's no gas to run those turbines, you cannot have electricity. So what I suspect has been the issue in the last couple of weeks, where we've had this very erratic and poor power supply. where generation has dropped from the average of 5,000 megawatts to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 megawatts, is because we haven't had, it's a combination of factors. First of all, this is the end of the dry season, so the hydros that pretty much give us our base loads, water levels, they have to manage it. So in other words, they probably run one turbine. But the gas gencos may not have had adequate gas. So the question is, why don't they have adequate gas at this point in time? I can tell you gas is, we have excess gas in this country. And we have enough pipelines to get this gas to the power plants. The issue, it didn't start today, the issue has always been the ability of the gencos to pay for the gas. Keep in mind, the gencos do not produce their gas. They buy their gas from the shells, the gas producers. Those gas producers have inputs, cost inputs as well, to produce that gas. Never mind the fact they're flaring, and they flare under regulation anyway.
Exactly.
You know, but
you say we have enough, and yet we don't have enough.
We don't have enough for the power sector because what has been supplied to date, there's a lot of, nobody has collected the money to pay the gas producer. So the gas producer is running at a loss. Keep in mind what I told you about the generation companies invoicing the sector 730 billion and they were paid 300 and something billion, 400. How would they pay the gas producer? So I think there's an accumulation of bills or debts at the gas side, and the gas companies have simply said, you know, we're just going to turn off the taps.
Let me ask you
and
this.
hope to get payments.
Each of these companies pay taxes, right? Now, I'm wondering, are these gencos who are unable to pay for gas, are they all private, public?
Combination of private and public.
How culpable are the public gencos?
I would say they are culpable to the extent that they also get paid for the power that they produce.
By us?
Yes.
And do they pay taxes to the federal government?
Oh, yes, they do. They pay taxes.
They collect money from the federal government to work for us and still pay taxes to the federal government. Why don't they use their tax money to pay the gas companies? So that we can have power.
You know, the way the federation, we are in a federation made up of federal, state, and local. And in that federation, there's certain entities that report to the federation and there's certain entities that report to the federal government. The FIRS reports to the federation. The FIRS will not allow for that. Yes, you can do some form of tax incentives, but tax incentives are based on either you're having pioneer status, which I don't think any of them have anymore because they may have exhausted it, or you're doing something like the, I think it's Executive Order 7 or 10, where you can do infrastructure and you get a tax rebate because that infrastructure would have been done by the tax. For electricity, you have consumed, you should pay. The question is, are you paying the right price for it? Or are you getting the right service? Right?
We're certainly not getting the right service.
You talked
the consumer is certainly not getting the right service.
Mr. Omonfoman, that you talked about the efficiency or a lack of it of the regulator. There's huge questions on my mind. You guys who are experts in this field will tell us that we shouldn't compare the telecom sector with the energy sector. You said we should not, all right? But they are both services. They are not products. They are both technical. Well, maybe one is more technical than the other. Maybe one is more complex than the other. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what we, the people, want is service to be served right. As and when tariffs have been raised, people pay tariffs, they still do not get the services. Yep. In some cases, you talked about the 12 million. I don't know how many of those 12 million customers of discos in Nigeria today are on prepaid meters. I don't think they're up to 1 million. If they're up to 1 million, they're not up to 2 million. So people get estimated billings all over the place, and they still do not get the kind of service. So what exactly do we expect the people to do? Because clearly, no quantum of explanation will
Will
suffice.
satisfy the consumer.
Your question is, again, I'm a consumer and I feel the pain. And I will speak from my point of pain, but also I'll try as much as possible to speak as an expert as well. The consumer, a consumer like me, I want to pay for electricity I get. And I use electricity a lot. But however, we have a situation where some days I don't even have electricity, and some days I have, and then it blinks, and then maybe when I'm getting ready to use it for another purpose, it goes off unreliable. So there's a reluctance to pay because you're not getting the service you want.
You're frustrated.
Right? There's a frustration. So that frustration has built up. Now, to ameliorate that frustration, your prepaid meter has come in. So before I had a prepaid meter, I was extremely frustrated because whether you had electricity or not, you were billed. And it was like a fight to go get my meter. I eventually paid to get it. And then when I got it, it sort of reduced the frustration, but you still need electricity to work. The only thing is that is that you're not paying for
not having
it.
Yeah.
You know, but that after a while, that goes away, that frustration builds up. The real issue here is we need to address some of those structural problems like I mentioned, where your billing efficiency is 74%. I mean, you got 100% power, you build 74, and then out of that 74% you build, you're only able to collect less than just above 60%. That's a huge gap. So there has to be some efficiency around that. The other issue is that we need to have discos who can bring in the financial muscle, because a lot of these problems you have, your feeder could have electricity, there could be power, but your transformer is out. Maybe one fused, and then it takes 5 days for somebody to fix. So I think we need to make investments in this sector, but the federal government cannot be the only party making the investments. States must start to create the enabling laws that would allow investments in electricity sectors at their state level.
Well, you are an expert in this area. So are you making any effort to convince the states that they can actually do this?
Yes, so my company, we're currently in conversations with some state governors trying to structure ways how they can take advantage of some of the regulations or some of the provisions of the Constitution, and how they can best structure the electricity markets within their state. Again, this is complementary to what the federal government or what the federal structure is. Okay. It's not a competition. So we're working with some state governors to make sure they get that right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Odion Omonfoman. Well, he's an energy expert, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of New Hampshire Capital Limited. Thank you for coming to, well, would I say clarify? Okay, is it clearer? Maybe. Well, we
know what the problem is.
We have been educated a bit more about exactly what is going on, but still, there is no power.
There's no power.
Okay, we shall be back in just a moment with the home stretch. See you in just a moment.